guest today started working in her family's cafe at a young age, probably too young by her own admission. In the early to mid-90s, Melbourne's coffee scene was very different to what we know today. High volume, long days, probably average coffee. But young Mel Caia loved it. After a decade or so, she took a break from the industry and started working as a coffee and gelato trainer at William Angliss Institute, where she still teaches today. So it was just a short break from the industry. And then in 2006, she got accredited to judge coffee competitions and has since adjudicated on dozens of national and international competitions, including the World Barista Championships. Today, we're very excited to welcome Melissa Caia, coffee educator and competition judge, to the Coffee Lab. Hi, Mel.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank for coming along.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about those early days.
They were very different,
Yeah.
and a bit scary. So at some stages, a bit scared to use the coffee machine.
Really?
3 kilo bag of pre-ground coffee in the fridge, no grinder.
Yeah.
Oh,
obviously.
wow, really?
And then the, good old 2-group ranchillo machine just sitting on the counter with some ground coffee on the side. And I think back and I think, they must have been terrible coffee.
Oh, yeah.
Screeching jugs of milk, like as much foam and boiled as much as you could.
Yep.
I don't think it was very tasty.
Yeah, right. What was it like kind of working in that sort of family environment? And ballpark, how old are we talking here?
13.
Yeah.
13. How old were you when you first tasted coffee?
Oh, little, like my dad's coffee.
Yeah.
Because he was a early riser. So fruit and veg market.
Yep.
He'd leave at like 2 or something. Or 2 a.m.
That's the middle of the night. That's not the morning.
No, sorry, that's early, yeah. And I could smell it. So I could smell the coffee from my room brewing. So the good old macchinetta stovetop. And it's the smell. So that smell for me is very nostalgic.
Yeah.
And we were allowed to drink coffee as kids. It wasn't banned. So a little sip. Pretty young.
Because what's it called? You know where they, it's with eggs and sugar and coffee.
Oh, the zabaglione.
Yeah, did you have that as well?
Not
was that
really.
How you first got introduced, or
no,
it was just coffee?
In the little, macchinetta, the little cups, with a bit of sugar, so it's sweet. And that was it. I think because it was just part of what we do, it's part of our culture. Like you have coffee in the morning, you have coffee after a meal, and you're allowed to taste it.
Yeah.
But it's not like we drank copious amounts of it.
Yeah.
And the smell for me was very distinct.
Are those early memories sort of where you fell in love with it, or did that come later?
That came later.
Where
So
was
that came later after I was working at one of the cafes, and I knew through my teens I wanted to be in hospitality, some aspect of hospitality. I was probably more suited to front of house, like where I am now. And although I did want to work back of house, I did want to do chefing or something to that degree. But I love the fast pace, adrenaline rush of making coffee. It's a young feel back then. You sort of part-time job. It was good fun.
Was it a bit more in that time? I imagine it was almost a bit more European, for lack of a better expression, like less takeaway, more dining.
More sit down. Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a lot of I don't even remember takeaway cups as being as big as what they are now.
Yeah.
And there was no bring your own cup or anything, very rarely. Because we were in a shopping centre, we had our regulars, so the other retailers would come down or in fact just order from, say, oh, can I get my regular too? They
Just from upstairs.
From upstairs. And
Yeah.
by the time they got down, it was ready for them. And that was probably a little bit of takeaway for them. That's about it. But a lot of people still like to sit. We had a bar, so it made it more inviting to sit. And one of the other cafes I worked in, we had a lot of floor space. So we had a lot of tables. So sometimes I was on the tables and we did volumes there. It was crazy volumes, 4-group machine. Oh, I reckon we did 10 kilos in a day sometimes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a lot of coffee.
Because it was very few of those cafes at the time. So we're talking mid-90s.
Yep.
Cafe scene was different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was it just family business? Tell us about the business that you first started
Most of the businesses I work for were owned by families.
Yeah.
So, and that was good too because there's a lot of small business principles in that. Often they had other stores as well, but all family owned.
Yep.
And I pretty much stayed predominantly in one area because I loved it. It was just, you got a good crew of people working with you. And that was a family within itself. So your colleagues. So it's a different sort of working space. And yeah, I just love the smell, the thrill, it's fast paced. It wasn't boring. It's tiring, but it's good.
What was the industry like back then? I imagine it was very different to what it is today.
Different, but it was still big. Like it was a different thing. So like you would see a lot more sales reps face to face. They come through. It's still got similar principles. And in terms of the cafe scene, what we see now, it's completely different to what it was in the 90s. We demand a bit more quality now. There's still that, like you were saying, that European sort of cosmopolitan feel. I think there was heaps of that. One thing is that socialisation aspect where people would gather. So having meetings, it's still the same. So there's some things that don't really change. They look like they've changed on the outside, but they actually haven't. It's maybe technology or other things that make it look like it's changed. So principles are still there. But yeah, it was quite an interesting time, but a good time to learn. And it kind of put me in the steps of what I was going to do next without realising at the time.
Where did gelato enter the picture?
Oh, one of the cafes that was heavily focused on coffee also focused on homemade Italian gelato. And that's where the two sort of combined or came together. So the venue it was considered a cafe, but they made their own gelato on site.
Was that unusual back then, the homemade gelato thing? Because now there's a gelato shop on every corner.
Yeah, just about. I know. It was still very popular, but it was very selected areas. So you knew you had to go to Carlton or something for
the proper stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was hard to find good stuff. There was lots of the franchise group, Wendy's and all those sort of places or New Zealand. But the actual gelato, there were a few. Now it's just looks like it's everywhere because we have a lot of social media. So we have a lot of different marketing that promotes them in a different way. We didn't have social media back in the shop. People knew by word of mouth, you go there, that's where it is. Although there were 3 or 4 other ice cream venues in the area, that's where you went for gelato, for example. Yeah. And it's grown a little bit. So the gelato world has grown and it's taken off. It's almost had a revive or a rebirth sort of thing where it's come back again. It's always been around.
Yeah.
So with the, I suppose the grounding that you got working in the cafes, was there you're on coffee mainly, I'm assuming, but was there a particular role that you had that you just hated doing?
Ooh.
Cleaning, surely everyone says cleaning.
No, see, that's where I like cleaning. See, that's
really?
Okay. Well, I was managing the store and we, at the end of the day when it came to like shut down stuff, I'd be like, I'm on dishes because I knew that my staff would want to go into the corner and sort of hide because it was like wind down for them. And it's like, no, you should be winding up. This is when we need to, clean up and stuff. So I could still watch what they were all doing. Yep. So we used to have stations that we'd all clean. And I used to go for dishes sometimes. I really loved it.
That's crazy talk.
Yeah, probably not familiar for you. But stuff that we didn't really sometimes it was rubbish, taking out the rubbish.
Yep.
Fortunately, we didn't have toilets to clean. Like some cafes, you got to do it all.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to learn how to do it all.
Absolutely.
And when did you make the shift into education and why?
Education came about probably in about 2005. I first attended Coffee Academy in 2003. I was still at the cafe and my manager or, owners at the time said, how about you go to this course? It was new. There was not really much coffee training around like there is now. There wasn't sort of a lot of choice. Just go into a course, go learn some new things. And I thought it was really interesting because there was something like official. There was a training sort of plan where you could follow certain things. And I did the program, I did the course, and from there met Jill Adams. So she was my instructor.
Yep.
And kept the connection with Jill. So she just started the academy. I think she started there in 2001, 2002. She was previously at another training centre. and maintain relationship with Jill. And then through that, eventually her suggestion was to come and do some training. And I was like, no, can't do that.
To be a trainer?
Yeah. And I was like, no way, can't do that.
Yeah.
And slowly, so I had to do obviously an education course to become a trainer at TAFE, and also wanted to get better coffee out in cafes because I was still seeing a lot of, people didn't understand just basic espresso, like how to extract an espresso shot. They just would pull super long shots or just say, oh, the machine did it, or the grinder, and they wouldn't even know how to touch the grinder sort of thing. And it's really interesting how it's so simple just to manipulate a few things, as you guys know, to get a better result. And so for me, that was the thing, is empowering staff or empowering people to just learn how to do it a bit better to get a better result, better outcomes, or, you get a job or something, but also sharing the information because I was given that opportunity.
Have the systems and coffee menus changed much from like today, from when you first joined the academy? Like are the kinds of drinks that you're training students on now very different? And also, is the training just beverage related or equipment related, or do you have to focus on workflow and optimization of time and things like that?
Look, it depends on the customer or the client, and also we run training programs that teach people the basic skills of how to make it, and we find that you got to focus on that first, especially for newcomers, before you try and throw everything at them, because it's very overwhelming for them. So it's quite education focused in a way where you just break down the steps to the learning. I think you have to learn the skill. You can acquire the knowledge as you go through, but the skill setting is quite important. There are some courses where we would encourage workflow, because I see that's a big issue for some cafes where they haven't, even their poor design or just their lack of customer service approach, where they, you go into a store and you're like, where do I get served? And who works here? Or like that unknown of, and it shouldn't be like that in a food service sort of type of industry.
It really got like that for a while though, didn't it, in
Still
cafes?
Still is.
Like, yeah.
It's my passion.
Oh man, I went into a cafe a few years ago and I walked in, I had one of my children with me who was very, very young at the time, and I said, we'd just like to sit down and have a cup of coffee. Are there any tables available? And the guy goes, mate, I haven't got away from this machine for the last 2 hours. I don't even know.
No.
And I said to him, do you know what? I'll save you the time. I'm going to leave.
Go somewhere else.
And we'll go somewhere else. But yeah, it's really stuck out in my. It was a terrible experience. They make really good coffee there, though. That's why I went.
Doesn't matter.
But it was a terrible experience, and I haven't gone back since. Actually,
good.
Well, there you go.
And I won't go.
Yeah.
No, and then that's really important. You mentioned that, because I think customer service has fallen away a little bit, and we want to encourage that. Where it's a service type of industry, you're providing a product to a customer. Why not engage with them? Why not say hi, have a chat? And one thing I was taught early on was you might be super busy, but just acknowledge them with eye contact. Say, I'll be with you in a minute, just so that there's that acknowledgement that you're aware that they've been waiting, but, don't sort of download on them and tell them how bad of a day that you're having. And I feel like we're losing that a little bit. And I still want to encourage people to provide that customer service, because at the end of the day, it's all part of the package.
I'm sensing that you sort of feel like some of the hospitality is sort of gone from hospitality. Like
100%. Yeah. I feel because that's what I teach, but also that's because what I've been trained to do. It's very embedded in me. And for me to go and order via a QR code, although it's amazing, fast service, and I can get served straight away, because sometimes I need that with little kids. You need that because you're just like, I need food for them. But other times I'm just like, I can just do this from home. Yeah. Like this whole, I love the technology of ordering apps, but I'm pressing on a QR code, I'm sitting at a table, I have to go get my own cutlery or my own napkin or glass of water, and I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, aren't I the customer? Where's that little bit of, but then not all cafes are like that. Not all food spaces are like that. And they're the sort of elements where I think, yes, technology is great, but don't forget to train the core concepts of hospitality.
Absolutely. Well, I think that to your point, now that, you know, you can really do most things at home that you could have only traditionally gone out for.
Yeah.
And because everything's so expensive as well.
True.
Well, the prices haven't decreased because we get our own cutlery.
Definitely not. Definitely
Correct.
not. But people, in bricks and mortar retail, people now are going because they want to have an experience.
Correct.
So whether it's going to shop for clothes, because you can buy those online now, you can make pretty good coffee at home, like we said, and there's online subscriptions, and even the coffees in the supermarkets have really sort of leveled up in terms of what you can buy now. You've got to have a great experience to warrant the I suppose the effort and expense of actually dining out.
Yes.
So that's going to be the competing point in the future for sure.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that's important to kind of pass that on to the next generation of people who are going to be running hospitality businesses?
Definitely, because there are still those skills that are required. So you'll see that at, you know, fine dining restaurants, you know, the hospitality program is designed for that. It's you know, the 20 steps of being the waiter or setting up the table, the front of house 20 steps. You know, it's greet the customer, it's seat them, it's pour the water, it's making sure the cutlery is correct. It sounds silly, sounds like, but they're just real core customer service or hospitality sort of things or skills that's still required, and it's a profession. And I think people forget that this can be a profession, and some of the other professions that look a bit nicer or look a little bit better on paper perhaps might get more focus. And, you know, hospitality sometimes is seen as an in-between role.
Yeah, it's kind of seen as a transitionary thing, right?
Yeah.
A lot. I think in Australia a lot. Like you go to Europe and you see people who are, you know, career waiters or career hospitality staff, whereas here it's almost perceived as a job you do during uni.
Yeah, definitely.
For
and
sure.
look, I was one of those too. Even though I was studying it, who knew that I was going to end up where I am?
Yeah.
So, you know, I could have diverted and gone back into nutrition because I did pick that up for a while and thought I wanted to go into naturopathy nutrition area. So, but I've remained in this space. And I think we need to relook at that and say, well, it's still a profession and a lot of us have made careers out of this.
Yeah.
What are you actually teaching these days?
These days, I dabble a little bit in the coffee space. Sometimes I sit more as the advisory person at work just to help the other trainers, help with the other programs. And I do a fair bit of gelato training as well.
Yeah, right. Gelato, I don't know, this is my perception, but I feel like there's a lot of different ways of making gelato. Am I right?
Depends who you talk to.
You're right, okay.
There's
I knew it was going to be a
there's one way.
controversial question.
There's one
There's a few. There's many ways. It's like cooking. Okay, so it's like cooking in a restaurant. A chef can cook a steak or a fish many different ways. They all might be great, and that's true. I guess when it comes to gelato, it's a lot like the baking world where there's a science behind it.
Right.
So there needs to be a recipe balance, and gelato is not ice cream. Which is another thing that people go, oh, gelato, ice cream, same. No, they're not. They sit very differently. If we look at them as products, they're quite different. But gelato is a happy food. So most of the time your customers are quite happy to see you. And then like obviously when I was working in the space of coffee and gelato, it was like double win because you're giving them the caffeine because it's like their morning ritual, and then they're having their gelato later on in the day or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So people are generally happy.
So in Mel's world, what's the right way to teach gelato or to make gelato?
I think from raw materials, so the milk, bit of cream, the sugar, as close to the real materials as possible, and fresh daily. So a lot like roasting. You know, like when I think about it, you don't roast a coffee for 6-12 months later. We want to use it within, 21 days or a few months.
Yep.
Same with gelato. You want to make it fresh today and sell it by next week and keep that rotation. So it's making it fresh, using the raw materials and just keeping to the tradition of some of the the key concepts of how it all works.
I would assume that some of that tradition gets pretty heated, like people get pretty opinionated on what's right and what's wrong.
Probably not so much here. I reckon overseas it
like
would.
pasta and stuff overseas.
Yeah, I think overseas here we're really open. I think here maybe I get a little bit too passionate about it. But anyway, but I think here, because everyone's still hungry for the information, we're still learning and we're looking at all those stores thinking, how do they do that? Why does it taste like that? Oh, it's really good. Or we've also got to remember that people are taking those concepts of gelato and how to make a frozen dessert and then transforming it for their culture or their background. So there's a lot of places around that are just doing specific kind of style of gelato or ice creams or sorbets because they've taken the concepts and then they've now fused them, like so the Asian flavours and bits and pieces. So moving away from your traditional flavours.
Yeah. Yep. How has both in coffee and gelato, how has the education and training changed over the time that you've been teaching?
There's definitely a change. When you it's really interesting getting sort of secondary kids in. I find they're the ones you can sort of inspire and you can see them twinkling if they really love it or if they're just like here for an excursion, they're not into it. But that's the next generation coming through. And it's really good to see that there's still some of those students who are really keen on foods or hospitality or whatever it might be. Some of the principles are exactly the same. Some it's more about, and it's not so much the content you're teaching, it's your education. You have to modify your education ways. You see a lot more needs. You're seeing a lot more technology. You're seeing a lot more different lifestyles. So you got to sort of adapt very quickly and do different, like manage the classroom in a different way. Yep. And you've got so many different personalities.
Yeah. Does cultural context enter the conversation as well? Like I imagine when you started, it was probably all young Italians and Greeks and those kind of people doing hospitality. Like, has that changed at all?
Not necessarily. Like I think about the crew that we had. Okay, one of the cafes was a little bit heavily like that because it was but it was good fun. Like there was lots of banter and, the father of the owner would come in and we all be like on code. There'd be a code word when you knew he was coming because you knew you had to like tidy up or not touch something a certain way. And it was really traditional. It was so fun. And I love those days because you kind of miss those moments where you're like, such and such is coming and we'd be like, right. So there was those aspects, but we still had a good mix of cultures within our teams. We weren't very sort of focused in a particular way where you had to sort of look for a particular, personality. It was more about personality type and skills you can teach.
Yeah, exactly.
Should have asked this earlier. How did you get into teaching gelato? Was it like they were advertising? You're like, yep.
Well,
I'm gonna get involved in
that
this.
That sounds
one.
delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was because at the shop we used to make it on site.
Yep.
And so back then, although I was like the kitchen assistant, so I wasn't allowed to touch any of the ingredients because. And now that I do what I do, I understand why because you can mess up a recipe really easily if you don't weigh up correctly. And so I used to assist out the back every now and again and I loved it. I thought gelato was awesome. Oh, who doesn't like a bit of ice cream or gelato every now and again, right?
It's like, were they just going, we're going to start a gelato academy and you're like, all right.
No, well, it came about, well, definitely. So I sort of highlighted to them. So what had happened was Carpigiani were looking for another sort of branch, another sort of arm, and us being a focused kind of foods and hospitality pastry kind of a education space, I think it looked like a really good fit. So back at the time there was a few conversations and I said, I used to live in the world of gelato for about 6 or 8 years when I worked at the cafe, and it was funny how much you actually learn just working in the back without even sitting there with a book learning about how much you actually pick up.
Yep.
And so when I started to go through the material again and sort of help them out with everything, I thought, I already know all this. Like there was this weird sort of sense of, I didn't realise I actually knew
You
that
just soaked it up
information.
by osmosis.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
And so I then went over to Italy and had a look at the facility, and it's amazing. It's phenomenal. And worked very closely with the team in Bologna to how do we get this off the road to, execute it here in Australia. And that was about 10 years ago. So I remember going over in 2014, going to Carpigiani, the university there, having a look around, and I still am in contact with, the same team who look after that education space. And look, they've even modernised. So even in that world, there's so much new technology. There is so much new. They're looking at all the different markets, all the different trends. They look at all the different things that are happening, and they're sort of revitalising a lot of their programs as well.
It'd be quite a challenge being in the education space for both coffee and gelato, like with all the, like to your point, with all the technological innovations and the automation and semi-automation that we're seeing in equipment in all hospitality.
Yeah.
Trying to educate someone of how this piece of equipment thinks and, how you can add it to your workflow. But it's like, well, you actually don't need to do that anymore because you just press this. It must be really super interesting because it's changing so quickly.
It's so interesting, but there's still that take a step back. I think people still need to understand the basic skill.
Yep.
Because that's the reason why we have that new automation, or that's the reason why we have that upgraded technology, because we're looking at improving workflow. We're looking at those high volume places that need something that's faster than you or I can do.
Yep.
So there is validation in that. But then you've still got those smaller venues where it's okay for us three to be working behind the cafe, behind the bar in the cafe, and we can manage that. But there are definitely there's a lot of change. There's a lot of and even in the gelato world, the technology is phenomenal, like I was saying, but you still need to know how to mix something. You still need to know how to weigh a product. You still need those basic skills to be able to, the machine can't do everything for you because that's the artisan. So that element of coffee as well, that I think sometimes that human touch is also given someone that it's that feel that's not tangible. You can't actually pick it up and grab it like, a mixing bowl or a saucepan or whatever it is. But there's that element where you still need to work through the process.
Yeah. That's a really nice segue actually into the world of competitions and competitive hospitality, if we want to call it that. How did you end up judging coffee competitions?
Very weirdly. So I'd started at the academy, and then Jill at the time goes, why don't you go to watch a competition? I was like, oh, cool, maybe I'll compete. Because back then, 2006, it was still happening. It'd been around for a good 6 years. It was still really new. And I thought, yeah, that's really cool. And I'm glad I went, because it was just a way to see that there is progression. There's a way for us you don't just stop here. You can keep moving through the industry. And I walked away thinking, yep, I could compete. And I don't know what happened. Something happened between that thought and then having another conversation with someone else saying, why don't you come and judge? And I was like, judge? What? Judge coffee? No, I can't do that. What do I, and I did. I sat through the accreditation and was nervous as ever because there were exams, sensory exams. And you think, you can't really study. There's only so much study you can do for a sensory. You can train sensory. Now you can train sensory. You can repeat and train. But back then I kind of went in a little bit blind and did a train and just sat through the accreditation. I did okay. I did well. And that's how it sort of transformed. I sort of got more involved in that and forgot about competing totally.
So did you ever actually compete?
No, I did a cup tasters comp. And I remember being up on stage and they're like, this is Mel, she's one of our judges and one of the best palates. And I was like, oh my God. And it was almost like stage fright. And I was up against another champion barista and we're like, we've got this. And when you do cup tasters, it's the triangulation. So you sort of spot the difference. And I didn't do too well. I think the pressure.
So you started in Australian, like ASCA,
Yes.
I suppose, Australian
Yes.
Specialty Coffee Association, and then moved into Worlds.
Correct.
Beyond that, when was the first time you judged in Worlds?
Worlds was 2013.
Yep.
So the way it works is obviously you need to do some regional local comps, then do some nationals.
Yep.
And I probably could have certified earlier for Worlds. I just don't think it was the right time back then. You have to become a world judge, you actually have had to do at least 2 national comps. So you still need the judging experience, and then you sit certification. So the WCC set up all these sort of exam days where you go in, you do like a written test, you do several sensory tests, then you do like application tests where you're in a judging kind of panel and you get marked.
Yes.
You essentially get assessed on basically your knowledge of the rules and regs, but in a practical way.
So you get judged on judging.
Correct, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's nerve-wracking because it's pretty
Oh, it would be.
pretty full on. And then the skills test, that's even funnier because day to day you can make your espresso, you can texture milk and you're fine. But then when you're in the spotlight, and it's almost like that's how the competitors feel. So it's actually really good
Good context.
that's how the competitors feel when they're being watched by 7 people with the clipboard and a pen.
Yeah.
They are almost feeling the same. So accreditation was 2013. The first one was in Melbourne for me.
Yep.
And then obviously travelled
Yep.
from most of them.
Yep.
And my last one was actually in Melbourne when Anthony Douglas won. So the last one in 2022, which was kind of a nice way to sort of finish up for now. So I'm on a temporary break.
Yeah.
Hiatus.
Has it changed much? Like the criteria of the judging over that, roughly 10-year period, is it become, I don't know if strict's the right word, but more rigid in its assessment of cleanliness, or has it changed?
I think it's actually, don't take this the wrong way, but it's sort of like we weren't, as a judge, you weren't allowed to smile, for example. You had to remain poker faced.
Oh, really?
Whereas that's taken away. You're actually allowed to say, thanks, David. If you get served a coffee and they say, here, Mel, here's your coffee, you're allowed to say, oh, thanks.
Oh, you weren't allowed to.
You weren't actually allowed to talk. You're still not allowed to talk, but you're allowed to acknowledge, and you're allowed to smile now.
Okay.
You weren't allowed to smile.
Wow.
So if they were saying something, you were just like always poker face.
Oh, that would mess with my head.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Imagine
So
trying to perform, when someone's
If you
just
tried to
like,
make a joke,
oh no jokes.
they're just like, stop.
No, we
just
do not
keep
do that
the
here.
coffees.
Yeah.
Because I've been judging for a while, so they'll use my name a bit now, or they'll say, ladies or ladies first, or whatever it might be, and
Yeah.
you're sort of like, it's actually nice to be able to acknowledge them. We can shake their hand now and say, good luck before their routine or before their performance.
Yep.
So
It kind of feels like what you've just described kind of feels like strictly ballroom, none of those new steps, none of that. It's all got to be
by the book.
That's it.
Well,
Wow.
the funny thing is as well, though, how we were just speaking about automation?
Yes.
That's entering World Coffee events now.
Yeah.
Yes.
In terms of automatic tampers, there's been a fully automatic coffee machine for the most recent World Latte Art Championships for the first time.
Yeah.
Which is, I think everyone was really surprised when that happened. I know I was.
Yeah.
Do you see that subsiding, or like they're just testing the waters, or do you sort of feel like that's where the industry's going, so the comps need to move with it, but also how does that change how you would assess a competitor as a judge?
So I think you probably won't see that much in barista, but that's for the latte art comp where the sensory component of the coffee is removed. So latte art is predominantly the skill and what you present in the cup, so it's a little bit different. And for some competitors, it might feel better because they've got this automation that helps them with their espresso, and they can work through it a bit differently. Whereas with barista, it's still very much a skill-driven competition.
Yeah.
And Brewers Cup is different, although it's so popular.
Yep.
So brewed coffee is phenomenally popular. The rules, unless they change the rules, there's not much kind of bending for extra automation.
Okay.
So, for example, with barista, because that's the one I spent most of my life around, you're not allowed to bring 2 extra pieces of electrical equipment. That's your max. So you've got your espresso machine, you've got your grinder, and then the max of electrical equipment. So then you see competitors bring their battery pack, bits and pieces to help with their signature bev and stuff, which is clever because they're trying to bring in technology, or they're trying to bring in a new system, or because it's all about innovation as well.
Yeah, there's always these funny I remember I think it was 2015 in Seattle. Everyone seemed to be sous videing their coffee.
Correct.
That was like a big trend at the time, and I was like, I don't know about this. Like, have you had it? Like,
there are trends.
I'm so interested to know what that actually tastes like, though. And is it really different? And also, is there a particular signature drink that is really memorable for you that you've tasted? Because part of the criteria in barista is they have a signature drink at the end as well.
Yes.
And some of these things are like, is that even? It's like not even coffee.
Right.
Some of it.
It's extraordinary.
It's
some of them.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
It's like bartending sort of stuff.
Yeah. It is accumulation of. It's crazy. So sometimes it's like culinary, patisserie, bartending, barista, like coffee, all intertwined.
Yep.
So let's go back a step to the milk course, the desiccation stuff. So they're stripping the milk apart, or like trying to pull out all your solids out of the milk to get the creaminess, and then put it back into some more milk to add body and structure and stability and all this sort of stuff.
It sounds like cheese making.
Maybe, yeah. Well, I haven't really dabbled with cheese making, but just to change the result of how it's going to be perceived with the coffee. Like even just in the milk course, there's an advancement, I would say.
Yep.
Okay, it may not be the normal for every cafe because it might be either too expensive or whatever, but that's just to show you that there is that opportunity there. Then with signature bevs, yes, I've got lots that stand out. And sometimes it's just on a regional sort of national level.
Yep.
Craig Simon did he did a savoury one, which was really interesting. So there was the palm sugar with a bit of fish sauce and a few other things that was wow, this is interesting. So drinking it, because it was sort of sweet but savoury and interesting at the same time. And then, like I remember Sasha's drink from 2015 very vividly because all the descriptors were, I'm probably not allowed to even speak about competition coffee. It's against the rules. But there are those moments where they really stand out. But then the thing is that the rules change. So they're going to change what they do with their signature bev given the rules and how they work, but also what time of year they're competing, depending on where they're sourcing their origins from. We see a lot of the coffee processing methods have impacted a lot of their routines and the similarities and just the crossover. So they'll get their inspiration from something, and then that's their theme and their connectivity, I guess, to the coffee that they're using and why they've chosen that coffee. So that's the big thing across the competition, especially for barista. It's not just serving up coffee just for the sake of serving it up. It is, I've chosen this coffee because of all these factors. And it's actually really helped, I think, a lot of your farmers, a lot of producers help improve their coffee. So sometimes the competitions are helping all aspects of the industry, and it's a good way to, I guess, give back. And it's all volunteer. So it's all volunteer. No one gets paid for this stuff. Yep. We don't get paid. We volunteer our time, and it's because we enjoy it. It's an interesting space, and competitions are good fun, and you learn lots, and you meet all sorts of awesome people, and that's how you create your networks. And you get to see new things as well.
When you're judging though, it doesn't really even matter if you like it or not, right? Like you have to judge it. Well, how are you judging it on its merit? Like what are the signs that you're looking for?
Yeah, you've got a certain protocol that you've got to follow, and you've got a score sheet that dictates what you're assessing. So, for espresso, for example, we still assess crema, but it's just basically, is it there or is it not there? There's a lot of weighting on tactile experience and flavour and taste balance. So for a while, flavour wasn't really considered as an independent score. It was sort of intertwined amongst the score, and now it's been separated out, which is actually really good because now we're focusing on those unique flavours or characteristics of a particular green coffee or why it's roasted the certain way it is to promote a certain flavour or body or experience in the cup or aftertaste even. And now we've got a lot of weighting of the scores for that. So there's reward for that effort, but then so that's the roasting component, but then it's how the barista has made it. They can choose their own water temp, for example.
Yep.
They can bring tools along that can help them, and they would need to explain why they've done a certain thing as the result in that cup. Milks. So now there's the inclusion of plant-based milk.
Yep.
And that's interesting too. But a lot of people have mixed. So the trend the last few years is because there's been the allowance of I'm allowed to use a little bit of oat milk or I'm allowed to use a little bit of something else. Some of the competitors were mixing.
Like cow's milk with plant-based milk.
Yeah.
Wow.
To give a different
defeats the purpose though, I guess.
It's good for lactose-free people.
It would be.
How much do you see, is the real world leading the competition or is the competition pushing the real world? Where do the influences lie?
I think it's both, because then you've got these coffee ambassadors that have competed and then they're going back to industry to help them improve. Like I look at James Hoffman and I follow his sort of stuff and he does all these random kind of coffee things. But he competed maybe 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah,
he was huge.
Early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's still doing a lot of coffee education stuff. So I see how it's almost like front of house meets back of house. So you've got your front barista who's hands-on, understanding what we need to do, going back to your manufacturer or your roaster or your producer, whatever it might be, to say, okay, this is what we're looking for, this is what we need. And I see lots of innovation. Like I was able to get a tour at some of the factories again in 2014 and there's already innovation happening then. Like there was heaps of change in equipment.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've been through quite a few equipment factories myself and we actually I went to Simonelli Group's head office last year.
Yeah.
And the level of science that goes into what they're doing is it would blow people's minds.
Correct.
They've got actual they have coffee roasters in there.
Mm-hmm.
They have a scientific laboratory which studies milk, studies water, and looks at all things in terms of corrosion in equipment, what's optimum for pairing with coffee. All of these things, it's so data driven now. It's and they make espresso machines and grinders, and the level that they're going into is incredible. It completely blew me away
because they can see the potential, because they were around the Barista Championships for quite a while. They can see that's where there's a lot of growth, and they've got a lot of engineers that work with them as well.
Yeah,
no different. Like I went there, I went to La Chambali as well, and even you see the growth there because you kind of think here, they may not know about that sort of stuff. And it's like, no, they are working through that. They're almost ahead sometimes of even group heads, being able to manage a group head water and flow rates and stuff as a barista. That never used to occur.
Yep.
But now you've got so much more control.
Yep.
So obviously the equipment companies are looking at this. Well, how do we make a better product? And how do we help the barista do their thing at their end?
Yep.
And it's all valid. Like it's all part of our innovation and growth as an industry.
Well, what do you see kind of unfolding over the next, say, 5 years? 12 months ago, AI wasn't even a conversation topic. Now, AI is everywhere. How is something like AI going to impact
I'm not sure.
coffee,
I'm scared.
gelato, hospitality? You were talking before, the machine's not going to do the thinking for you. Actually, it kind of probably is soon. How do you see that unfolding?
Well, maybe it can profile in a way that I just humanly possibly cannot do, but we can get a profile that's achievable through AI, or the ability to change something quickly.
Yep.
Maybe it's faster. It's an interesting space because if I go back to what we were talking about earlier, the core concepts of hospitality, it's the human contact that we all go for.
Absolutely.
So the amount of conversations I've had behind the espresso machine about people's life stories are incredible, and people like that interaction. Yes, there's a need for elements of automation and perhaps AI, but it kind of makes me nervous about where is it going to drive the rest of the industry.
Well, I think that AI is great at automating tasks, obviously, and it's good at mimicking emotion, but it can't generate emotion. And I think something that all people need is connection and love. Like that's what human beings need.
We're human.
Right? And I don't think you can get that from a computer yet, but it might be that it
Yes. Yeah.
it will. But to that point, it can mimic it, but it can't genuinely create it.
Yeah.
But I think it'll get to the point where it just it will automate all of those friction points, and then you can double down on that interaction possibly as well.
Maybe it'll talk back.
Experience.
Or maybe when the cafes are closed and you really want a coffee and they're unavailable. So, I look at that space and think around the world there's a lot of late night venues.
Yep.
We don't have that many. Maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe it's just a way of life thing. But what if you do want a coffee at 9 o'clock at night, made like the one I get at 9 a.m. in the morning, not just the one I can do at home, or, there's a concept.
Robo coffee.
Cool.
Mel, thank you so much for joining us. We're running very rapidly out of time, but there are some questions that Dave likes to ask everyone before they wrap up. So first one being, if you could give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would you say?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I guess enjoy what you're doing.
Actually, maybe 13-year-old self.
13, oh yeah. Oh, that was an interesting one. No, well, basically, you don't know what you're doing now that's going to help you in your future, and everything's valid. So what you're doing now, although it might not seem like it's important or like it's anything good, it will help you. It sets your grounding. It sets the core skills and core things. So keep doing what you're doing.
Yep. What would be the most important lesson that you've learned over your career to date?
Have a go and trust yourself, because I was even put in a situation where working in a cafe where, because I was female, you're not allowed to make coffee. Like quite a few years ago, obviously. So it was like...
a cafe in a church?
No, not at all. It was in the city. But it was like, hang on. And I used to try and jump in because I could just to take over. But yeah, just trust yourself. Like don't. And also because sometimes you hear all these different things, and it's okay to hear all those different things because there's different ways.
And last question, if you were going to do something completely different tomorrow, maybe start a business or change career or do something entirely different, what would you do that's different?
If I was doing a business, it would be in the similar fields because you love it. But if I was doing something completely different, I did touch on the nutrition part ages ago, but that contradicts the gelato a bit. And I thought of being like a maternal nurse, like a...
that's a change.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so maternity nursing or something. That would be really different.
Yeah, sure would.
Yep.
Yeah. Kind of hospitality still. And to be honest, probably could be done better as well.
Yeah.
Our recent experience with that is, they could use a bit of training in the hospital front. So
maybe.
Anyway.
That's another.
That's, one hell of a change.
Yeah.
Mel Caia, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thanks. Mel.